Namaskar and good morning, everybody. And Mataji's, thank you for a wonderful song. Our theme for this morning is the bedrock of spiritual life. Most of you here being devotees of Sri Ramakrishna, you may have already guessed what it is. If there was any one single quality that Sri Ramakrishna appreciated above all others and liked to see in his devotees and disciples, one single quality that endeared him the most to him, it was purity of mind. Jesus Christ also said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." So, if we want to see God, love Him, and be loved by Him, we have to become perfectly pure. But the big question is, how? Because we have to live in this world. Sri Ramakrishna himself said, if you enter a sooty room, no matter how clever you are bound to get some soot on your body. It is unavoidable. Still, if we want to see God and be loved by Him, we have to live as carefully as we can in this world. We have to be wide awake, vigilant. It's extremely important to strictly follow the moral and spiritual path. There are people who lack a sense of wrongdoing. The more they engage in improper actions, the less sensitive they appear to become. Their moral sensitivity has become dull, but they don't care. They have no fear and no sense of shame. A sincere spiritual aspirant, however, maintains a strong moral sense. Vyasa, in his commentary on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, compares the mind of a yogi to an eyeball. Just as the cornea reacts immediately to even a speck of dust, the mind of a yogi reacts strongly to anything that causes distress. Without such a sensitive and alert mind, spiritual life is likely to end in failure. So, purity of mind is integral to spiritual life. In the Chandogya Upanishad, we read, when the food is pure, the mind becomes pure. When the mind is pure, the memory becomes firm. When the memory is firm, all ties are loosened. So only a pure mind can contemplate God continuously. In this Upanishadic passage, the word food includes everything that we take in through the senses. We must have pure food for the eyes, ears, tongue, nose, skin. Merely maintaining physical food purity for the stomach without purifying other sensory inputs is futile. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, "Blessed is he who feels longing for God, though he eats pork. But shame on him whose mind dwells on money and enjoyment, though he eats the purest food." But just as we just heard, despite our best efforts, it is inevitable that we accumulate some impurity during the course of the day. We will be astonished to find how much dirt has gathered, little by little, in the nooks and corners of our mind, and what a lot of cleansing is needed before we can progress on our spiritual journey. These impurities may be in a very subtle form, like some deep-seated impressions that are inimical to spiritual life. Let us never underestimate the effect of company, our conversations, our interactions. We need to cut down all that gossip, useless thinking, our many purposeless activities. These are all highly detrimental to a spiritual aspirant. We need to employ rigorous discernment in these matters. Let us refrain from accumulating new dirt through new worldly associations. Let us act in ways that mitigate the damage that is already caused. Let us counterbalance the demerits we have acquired by accruing sufficient merit through pure actions and thoughts. Of course, eventually the entire account of merit and demerit must be nullified, but that is much, much later. Right now, however, we need to balance our accounts. Both merit and demerit must be balanced so that the net value is zero. We must reconcile our old account and terminate our previous way of life. Then there should be no craving for new worldly associations or conversations, new diversions. Our whole spiritual life depends on this balancing, this adjustment. Currently, many of us have a negative balance. So we must earn adequate spiritual merit to square up the account. Only then can a new account commence. Spiritual life means opening a new account. Our mind is like a camera and projector in one. If we could project all the images that are stored inside, that would make quite a show. Everything gets recorded mercilessly, and it is often very disquieting to find what all lies deeply embedded in our minds. Impressions that we are not aware of, acquired semi-consciously or subconsciously. All these impressions are bound to surface during spiritual practice. The dwelling of this semi-conscious dwelling on thoughts, on impure thoughts, is particularly hazardous and causes serious troubles because it drives the impressions deeper, making them harder to root out. So let us hear it once more. We need to be vigilant and wide awake, always. One day we will see how true all this is. We need to be very, very careful about what impressions we absorb, what conversations we engage in or listen to. Let us never underestimate the danger simply because no immediate impression seems to be made. It'll all rise to the surface sometime, possibly catching us off guard. So, it is important to refrain from the habit of dwelling on old impressions, past associations, even at a semi-conscious or subconscious level. For this, first there has to be a basic change in our outlook and attitude, from the worldly to the spiritual. And then it must be followed by conscious thinking and acting along new, good, pure lines. This is how we generate pure thoughts and ideas. This is how to create new associations, spiritual associations. And depending on the intensity of our practice, we will see that our old worldly mind is gradually replaced by a new spiritual mind. So the essential thing is to maintain a high level of awareness under all circumstances, to avoid absorbing negative impressions through the senses, especially the eyes and ears. And should we inadvertently absorb such impressions, bad impressions, we must take care to eliminate them promptly. We have to exercise the utmost discretion in choosing our company and the information we expose ourselves to. We must make sure that everything aligns with our values and aspirations. Now, while we struggle for purity, there is one thing that the mind has a tendency to indulge in: feeling regretful, overly regretful about our past. The habit is so futile, so counterproductive, and yet so common. That is why all our elders and spiritual teachers make it a point to advise us to avoid it scrupulously, because it's a trap. All of them say, don't dwell on the past. One should stop all brooding over one's past, whatever it may have been like. What is done for all time and can never be undone. So think of purity, think of what you are going to do in the future, not of what you did in the past. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, the wretch who constantly says, I am a sinner, verily becomes a sinner. But one who thinks oneself pure really becomes pure. So let us strive to erase the past as much as possible and replace old associations, old impressions with better, purer ones. In one of his inspiring lectures, Swami Vivekananda remarks, would you try to wash dirt with dirt? Will sin cure sin? Weakness cure weakness? So we don't become pure by thinking of impurity. We will never get rid of sin by fixating on being sinners. This is nothing but wrong psychology and will always produce just the opposite effect. If we dwell too much upon these thoughts of sin and impurity, we lose sight of the fact that by our spiritual striving, we can attain something, we can achieve something. So let us always adopt the positive approach. Rather than thinking, oh, what a sinner I am, how impure I am, let us affirm that purity is my birthright. Purity is my true nature. I am free by nature. My very essence is purity and holiness. But then, affirmation alone is not enough. Side by side with that, we aspirants must also take special care to avoid all dangerous stimuli. in whatever the form may come. A tender plant has to be protected by a hedge. So spiritual life has to be lived at all costs, and that requires great focus and determination. Focus, determination, and also self-confidence. It is not for lazy, weak people. Swamiji said, if you have faith in all the 330 millions of your mythological gods and still have no faith in yourselves, there is no salvation for you. Yes, the sense of sin can be good in the case of some temperaments, and even there, only if it serves as motivation for higher efforts. It must drive us towards something spiritual. But a much better way of getting rid of impurities is to think of our own innate, inherent purity, which is after all our true nature. Habit may be our second nature, but purity is our primary nature. From a spiritual perspective, we are our own predecessors, reaping what we ourselves have sown. The law of karma is nothing but the law of self-effort. If we take care of our present, our future will be taken care of. We keep hearing, the pure heart reflects the truth. Of course, the pure mind and the pure heart are one and the same. So the purified, thoughtful mind becomes more and more alive to higher ideals. The purer the mind, the more awakened it is, and the better it reflects the truth. But so long as we cling to our false dolls and puppets of love that we all so greatly cherish, it is not possible to have at the same time a sincere or deep yearning for God. As long as we continue to do that, it is, as Swamiji said, playing at religion, pretending to be spiritual. Nevertheless, for every soul, there does come a time when these dolls and puppets lose their charm, when everything of the world becomes tasteless. Then comes that true and deep yearning for spiritual life. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that since the disease of worldliness has become severe, strong medicines, drastic steps are necessary. This is just what Vedanta provides. Powerful remedies to cure our condition. We need strong and large doses of Vedantic medicines, but they must never be diluted. Otherwise, they become ineffective. Having said that, what are our main obstacles? Our main obstacles are our own senses and their desires. These two are our main enemies because they constantly distract us from our spiritual focus. So it is most essential to lead a disciplined and controlled life. The power of desire is limitless, and as long as it is allowed to dominate us, we won't be able to follow or assimilate any spiritual teachings. Let us at least acknowledge this reality without denying it. We'll hear why a little later. It is not feasible to address each and every individual desire and eliminate it. No, we need a comprehensive approach. On the one hand, we should pray to God, surrender to Him, and let Him do His work. But on the other hand, we must also take responsibility for our own actions as long as we perceive ourselves as doers. We have to at least try to reduce our gross desires and our attachment to the physical world. We have to at least try to give up our attachments and all the so-called duties associated with them. That is the only way we can rid ourselves of the troubles and miseries of life in the world. In addition to praying to God for change, praying to God for change, and the ability to pursue the higher life, we must also do our part and contribute to the process. Attention to the world has to be minimized to what is absolutely necessary. Whether we live in a monastery or outside, we are always in the world. There is no escaping the world. But we must never allow the world to absorb all our attention. As the saying goes, the boat may stay in water, but water must not enter the boat. So, let us think about the Atman. Let us think about our true self more than we think about the body and the world. As we just heard, that is a very effective way of attaining real purity, by acknowledging our inherent purity and refraining from focusing on notions of sin, impurity, weakness, imperfection. We are all pure and perfect by nature. Only we have lost sight of this intrinsic perception. And that is what is causing us to commit mistakes, the so-called sins. Swamiji preferred to use the word error instead of sin. Errors of perception and action. Nonetheless, once we remember our true nature, impurity, sin, and imperfection become nothing more than mere illusions. If we practice this, if we really practice thinking of ourselves as the pure Atman, we can actually feel that this purity is natural to us because it is our own and has been ours eternally. It doesn't come from outside, nor is it added, nor is it newly created. Spiritual life is nothing but this inner development, although it is more accurately an unveiling than a growth. Because if perfection and purity were not intrinsic to our nature, achieving them would be impossible. So let us initiate a transformation within ourselves, then this transformation will automatically manifest itself outside. Our entire nature must undergo purification. It is not a matter of merely whitewashing it. First, the old layers must be scraped off, and then the ground has to be relaid in a proper way. This is exactly what intense spiritual practice, I underscore the word intense spiritual practice does. It helps us rise above the false personality characterized by impurity. It is the false personality, the ego, that contaminates my thoughts and feelings. If my real personality were impure, I could never become pure. But our real personality is intrinsically pure and luminous, and we must regain it. Good thoughts, good words, good deeds are no doubt great aids, but they alone, without intense spiritual practice, they alone are not enough to bring about complete transformation. They don't have the power to change me into something that I am not now. So there has to be a comprehensive shift in our attitude towards ourselves, towards the world, and more importantly, towards all the mental images and memories that are constantly rising up in the mind. We may feel bad when an unclean thought rises in our mind, but this should spur us forward all the more, make us more determined than ever. In fact, we should be thankful that we have come to know that such unclean things exist in our minds. If we didn't know them, we could never fight against them successfully. So, the greater the challenge, the more manly the fight must be, the greater our determination to remove it, and the greater our tenacity. I was just talking about acknowledging the reality and power of hidden desires without any denial. If there are nasty things in our mind, let us know this fact and know how bad it is. To recognize an evil as it is half the battle won. It is good for us to know the mind's potential to play mischief and do harm. That actually helps us remain vigilant and be aware of its deceptions. How much misery people create for themselves and others by giving in to impulses like lust, anger, and greed in spite of themselves. All these negative qualities will lie deeply embedded in our minds also if we don't identify and eliminate them. Unless we consciously turn our mind to the higher life, it will always remain full of these. So, for us spiritual aspirants, one of the most significant stages in the spiritual journey is this conscious shifting of the center of consciousness. Typically, our personality operates around some particular center. As Sri Ramakrishna observed, the center of consciousness in most people of the world is around the stomach or lower regions. For others, it is the lower heart, the seat of worldly emotions. But spiritual aspirants should learn to move their center of consciousness from the lower heart to the higher or spiritual heart. Through constant practice, we have to raise our consciousness to this higher center and always monitor whether our consciousness has sunk from this higher spiritual center. Maintaining one's higher spiritual center of consciousness is an important spiritual discipline in itself. Sometimes, when we investigate our mind, we observe subtle desires lurking in the shadows in seed form. If we are not careful in our behavior, these desires may eventually emerge, grow, and cause significant disruption. We may have great self-control, but underlying desires and tendencies haven't yet been annihilated. They are only kept under check. So, before realization, we are never completely secure And there is always the risk of faltering if we don't use the utmost discernment in our conduct and interactions with others. One should never be too bold, even if one is a person of the greatest control. And even for such a person, there are specific guidelines and rules of behavior to be followed, so that they may not lapse into something undesirable due to negligence or wrong associations. Even the Bhagavad Gita says, taste doesn't leave us easily. As a matter of fact, even in a person of the highest self-control, even in such people, some residual inclination towards sense objects, some residual craving for enjoyment remains in seed form. Those extremely subtle seeds of desire are only eradicated when they are finally burnt, roasted in the fire of direct superconscious realization. After that, there may be a semblance of desire, but it is ineffective, much like a burnt rope that can no longer bind. The contents of consciousness of such a person become so totally transformed that they have no influence on them. So, desire doesn't leave us until the very end. But still, even if we know that the seeds may sprout at any time, let us not lose hope. It should only make us aware of the magnitude of our task. We should recognize the difficulty, but face it with greater determination, singleness of purpose, and alertness. Let us neither exaggerate nor minimize the risks. Let us just be realistic and strong in dealing with ourselves. Now, to be frank, once in a while in our dreams, and sometimes also during meditation, awful images and thoughts come up, as if from nowhere, that make us shudder. They had all along been lying dormant in the subconscious mind, and there are plenty of them, and all this will rise to the surface sooner or later as we intensify our spiritual practice. But it is important not to be unnerved by this, but take it calmly and carry on with our practice. This is just the reality of spiritual life. The trouble may arise at any moment in subtle forms through some careless association with others, through a word, through a look. We are usually affected first in a very subtle way, and then it grows, and in the end becomes difficult to manage, and we are overwhelmed. This can happen at any time if we are not properly guarded and watchful. However, intense spiritual practice makes the mind sharp and highly sensitive. Such a mind, which is always alert and vigilant, is able to detect even the slightest desires as they begin to emerge and stop them right in their causal state. That is to say, without even allowing them to manifest fully on the mental plane. We should try to reach this stage somehow where we can tackle these desires right at their roots. But it requires a very high level of mindfulness and discernment. If we are really wide awake, we will be able to detect and destroy the trouble even before it starts developing. But this level of awareness is possible only if we are intensely devoted to the spiritual ideal, to God, and think of Him constantly. People ignorantly equate devotion with emotion. They have no idea what intense devotion does to the mind of a devotee. It sharpens the mental faculties as few can. Devotion to God, making the mind extraordinarily keen and perceptive. Those who have read the story of that great devotee, Nag Mahashai, they will know he was an extremely meek and humble person. But when Sri Ramakrishna saw him, at first sight, Sri Ramakrishna remarked, this man is a blazing fire. Anyhow, Holy Mother, Sri Sarada Devi, we think of her as the perfect embodiment of purity. She used to say, if a man constantly thinks about God, my child, by what way can evil approach him? But for us, mediocre aspirants, especially during the period of our spiritual training, we must do our best to avoid temptation in all its forms, gross or subtle. We should salute from a safe distance anything that might become an object of temptation to us. Let's not go near it. We should not be relying on our own strength for a long time to come. Our mind is already so full of unwanted impressions that once it is really stirred up, it can create no end of trouble. All the 6 enemies of spiritual life, I don't have to name them, they are all hiding right within, waiting to ensnare us. Most of the time, the trouble arises when we are too little aware of the danger, or when we tend to underestimate it. We think it is just a minor, insignificant ripple in the mind that will soon pass away. But the outer stimulus, however small, even if it is barely noticeable, gradually does affect the mind. Sometimes just the memory of some old impure impression is enough to upset us. Why? Because the germ, the seed, is always inside. It is never outside. Unless the seed is inside, it could never sprout. I just mentioned the 6 enemies of spiritual life. Just one of them, desire. Any strong desire is enough to muddle the brain and stop all progress. But when desire and anger combine, they can bring about spiritual ruin. All struggle for the higher life comes to an end when passion is allowed to dominate the mind. So let us never test ourselves in this matter. Let us never give an opportunity for passion to dominate us. This is the reason why we should carefully avoid any harmful stimulus, even if it is a very slight one, and keep our mind occupied with higher thoughts. This is why we should try to minimize as much as possible any unnecessary contact with worldly people. Avoid the company especially of those who don't lead a strictly moral life. We should never give lower propensities even a chance to rise. And more importantly, we should take care of our own thoughts. It is the nature of the mind to think, and if we don't give good, pure thoughts to the mind, it is, it is bound to think of bad and impure ones. So we should be up and doing. Together with being vigilant and earnest, it is also important to fill the mind with Vedantic thoughts until we sleep, until we drop dead, as a Vedantic saying goes. So we see that it all has to do mostly with the mind. As long as my mind is gross, I only avoid the bad deed. When it grows finer, I begin to avoid the bad thought. And thought is always the more important of the two. This we know. In moral and spiritual life, the stress is always more on the thought than on the deed. But the gross mind doesn't see this. A gross mind doesn't understand that it is affected when it is actually affected. A bad thought is just as bad as a bad deed. In the case of a spiritual person's morality, this is the condition that should be fulfilled. Thoughts, words, deeds, everything should be made pure, because all three are interconnected. Without purity of thought, there can be no purity of mind and much less purity of deed. You see how this leads to a larger dimension of purity. When the moral sense becomes finer still, we see that nothing bad is done by the person or caused by them or even approved of by them. That is a threefold responsibility. We should not do anything bad, we should not cause anything bad to be done, and we should not approve of anything bad being done, not to speak of profiting from it. So, there is heavier responsibility for a spiritual person. If an ordinary person does something wrong, it is not so bad as a spiritual person's doing something wrong. The more morally developed a person is, the greater their responsibility is. The more spiritually evolved a person is, the more they are expected to conduct themselves in a befitting manner than those who are not so morally or spiritually evolved. Their responsibilities are not the same. Now, after having heard so much about purity of mind, what is the ultimate purpose of it? What is our goal? Why do we need such a high degree of purity? All of us here know some Vedanta. According to Vedanta, God realization is the goal, the only true goal of human life. Our purity must lead us to God realization, which means going beyond the realm of morality. Our ideal is the person who has known God and is not bound by anything. By getting rid of evil tendencies with the help of good ones, such a person has risen above the relative plane and reached the transcendental plane. Mere morality doesn't make us spiritual, nor are mere morals any proof of a person's spirituality. Morality is essential, and there can be no spirituality without it. But morality doesn't equate to spirituality. Spirituality is something that far transcends the realm of morals and ethics. So, morality must lead to spirituality. Purity must lead to God realization. Vedanta says it is not enough to lead a good moral and ethical life. Something more is needed if we want to attain the supreme goal. Selfless acts and moral practices are only means, stepping stones to the achievement of purification. Because without purification, we cannot attain the goal of absolute freedom or supreme bliss. Jivan Mukti, Sukha Prapti. So the goal itself is freedom and bliss. This freedom and bliss is always within us. It is our real nature. Only it is covered by the impurities of the mind. When the impurities are removed, the true self, that is freedom and bliss, that shines forth. Incidentally, by impurities, we mean not merely bad thoughts and wrong tendencies. Our so-called good thoughts and desires, they too are regarded as impurities because they are obstacles to higher concentration and self-realization. Ethical life demands that we sublimate bad thoughts and impressions, but spiritual life demands that we transcend even good thoughts and desires. Why? Because they too keep us bound to the relative plane. As Swamiji said, the chain may be a golden chain, but that is not any less strong to bind. So they too keep us bound to the relative plane, whereas spirituality is all about transcending this relative plane. That is why a spiritual aspirant is asked to outgrow the so-called conventional morality. But that is much later, when the aspirant has achieved complete purification. Anyhow, in the end, to return to what we started with, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. So that is the purpose of purification. If we want to see God, if we want to experience the love of God, that is to say, to love Him and be loved by Him, then we have to become perfectly pure. That is the long and short of it. Thank you. I didn't plan it, but we could spend 2-3 minutes until 12 o'clock in meditation.